Hi there, everybody. This screencast will be a tutorial on a technique called predrawing. Now, predrawing is one of the foundational techniques used in this class. It actually teaches you how to create anything, and I mean anything, whether from using a reference and recreating it accurately on your paper, or creating it from your mind and making it accurate from your mind through your hand onto your paper itself. A piece that is accurate makes the viewer go, that looks just like a lion. Whereas a piece that is not, the viewer will become confused and the piece will look amateurish and not be successful. Your essential questions for this screencast are, what is predrawing? Why is it used? How do I do it? And when do I use it? What is predrawing? Predrawing means drawing before you draw. Look at this piece of comic art that I was working on in the center. It looks a lot different from the bold lines. That's because everything that's kind of ghosty, sketchy, and wispy, that's all pre-drawn. Likewise, see this drawing of the rabbit here in the bottom right? If we go over here to the left, that is what it would look like pre-drawn. Check out these examples of an upturned and a downturned nose. Right here is an example of what you would use to pre-draw that nose before you actually get to drawing the nose. The same goes for building unique head shapes and also plotting out where everything goes on the human face. And so that said, predrawing is mostly a light drawing made out of basic shapes. And those basic shapes include the sphere, the square, and the triangle. The sphere can be manipulated into an ellipse, or in other words, an oval. And also you can combine the two into cylinders if you need to. Predrawing is a skeleton drawing. It's drawing before you draw. It's something that you flesh out, that you add layers on top of, that you build upon. It's a rough roadmap. Roadmaps help you get to your destination. And ultimately, it's a tool for enhancing the quality of your work. Whether or not you use this skill will determine whether or not your work is successful. Predrawing is also a tool that you use to memorize and study your subject. A subject is the thing that you are drawing. If you're doing what's called a still life, drawing an image from life, one of the ways that you would commit that to your long-term visual library in your mind would be to pre-draw it out and study how all the basic forms within it interact together. And once you've got that memorized, you then can reconstruct and build that anytime from memory because you've studied how the pieces fall together. This is the main way that artists pull things out of their head and put it onto paper. So why do we do it? Well, it creates strong work, obviously, because you're building off of a template, off of a roadmap. Here's why it creates strong work. It saves your brain energy. You aren't thinking on the fly. You're not having to plan out where all of your planes and your forms rest. If you do that in advance, the hard part's already done. All the placement is there. It's just detailing after that. It's also used for accuracy. If you want to draw something and have it look like that something, you pre-draw it out. That way, if someone hires you to do a portrait, their head won't be twice the size of their body, and ultimately allows your work to be believable to the viewer. Work that's believable is work that's in proportion, where things line up, where it makes sense to them, because they're approaching your work not as you are. You created your work. Your viewer is a person who just shows up and looks at it without any prior exposure, and their brain has to process it and put together what they're seeing. And if you've done your work, if you use the techniques and the skills and the fundamentals, then that piece of art will make sense to them. And that depends on what you're trying to get to. What's your objective? Are you building an artwork piece, or are you studying a subject to commit it to your visual library? Well, if you're studying a subject, what you do is you simply practice turning your subject into basic shapes. We'll get more specific in a second. Now, once you get that figured out, reverse the process. Create a subject out of basic shapes. Build your art piece from basic shapes. You're building a piece of artwork. It's how you create original work. Here's what you do. Step 1, create the largest and most obvious shape representing your subject. Let's say you're going to draw this bunny rabbit right here. What is the most obvious and the largest form out of the shape? That would be simply a circle. All right, step 2, find the next most obvious shape and where it lies within that big shape that you started with. And then the next most obvious shape, and then the next most obvious shape, and so on, rinse and repeat until the piece is completely built. Now, step 3 actually happens during step 2. Step 3 is where you are always measuring your shapes against each other for accuracy. Let's see what that means. Common beginner mistakes involve simply drawing a bunch of shapes without actually thinking while you're doing it. And if you don't think while you work, your pre-drawing will look nothing like the bird that you're trying to draw. Nothing at all. If I were to take the bird's head and then stack those shapes on top of each other, How many heads would I stack from the tip of the tail to the tip of the forehead? I would stack 1, 2, 3, 4 heads. A little bit over 4. Knowing that, I now have some boundaries to work within. That helps so that I don't have an ostrich rather than a finch. So that's one example, using little bits and pieces of your subject. Where does the tip of the beak line up against the breast? It would be about the length of the beak, okay? If I want to make sure that this wing is placed on the correct spot of his torso, then I would use little reference points within the wing to help me. Where does the tip of the wing line up with the belly? Well, I know that my belly would need to go a little bit below where the tip of the wing is at. All right, where does the tip of the foot line up with the rest of the bird? Well, it lines up with where his eye is, okay? So that would be using a piece of the bird to help me gauge where the rest of the bird is at. And so, by breaking your bird into a bunch of basic shapes, and then measuring those shapes against each other, that's how you create an accurate pre-drawing. That's how your portraits look like the people that you're drawing. That's how your still life subjects will look exactly like they should on the paper. Pre-draw at pressure 1, as light as you possibly can. You should actually be able to take the eraser on your pencil, even lightly cast your eraser across your paper, and it should erase those lines. It should be almost invisible. And finally, as you can see, this is not about being gifted. This is not about having talent. This is a skill that you learn. You either do it or you don't. So when do I use it? You pre-draw during pre-production. You've already learned all the stages of the production process. Pre-production is when that happens. All that pre-drawing starts to go away during the production stage, where you're actually rendering, shading, painting, adding texture. And finally, during post-production, you should remove any unwanted pre-drawing lines that are still visible. That's for good craftsmanship. Now, to get this down, there's really no way that class time would allow for that. You need to do that outside of class, so practice pre-drawing in your sketchbooks. Go find different objects. Now, you could find really simple objects like this phone, or you could go find more complex objects like this. Now, beginners are tempted to draw things very flat right up against them. I suggest to you that you tilt your subject a little bit, make it 3-dimension. That makes it believable to your viewer. The better you get at it, the quicker you can do it, and then you can actually study things that are alive, that are constantly moving and in motion. I picked a couple of different pictures. This one mainly because it's pretty flat. He's kind of looking right at us. We have a few overlapping forms, but not that many. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, pre-draw in here, and let's just get started. So step number 1, find the most obvious and in-your-face form. Now, when you pre-draw, you don't want to be drawing like this, with big bold lines and that kind of stuff. What you want to do is get your hand moving so that you can kind of mimic the overall shape of what you're looking at. I'm going to get my hand moving and then bam, like that. Now, achieving control takes practice. Your lines should also be very light and sketchy. Sketchy looks like, kind of multiple lines in one area. But what I did is, if you're creating ovals, they're very easy. All you have to do is just kind of keep drawing over the same general area. You want to be very tight with your line drawings, and you also want to be very light because all of this is going to go away. All right, let's do the next most obvious shape. Basically, we as humans are directed to the face of most things that we see. So I'm going to go in here and let's pre-draw his head. All right, and then he has kind of a little nose. All right, obviously, he's got a couple of eyes. His ears, you could go ovals as well. Ovals really work great for organic and natural things. I'm just going to go triangle. All right. Okay, let's go to the next one. He's got an arm kind of out in the front over here. I'm going to go triangle. He's got his other arm. Triangle. Do a little circle for his hand. Circle for his hand, and now we've got this area over here. He's got a lot of fuzz, but he does have legs. The only thing is the fur and his chubbiness is covering up his legs. So let's just start with the most obvious. Let's go with his feet. Do triangles. Oval for this other one. Let's try to capture this haunch over here. I'm simply going to use little ovals. And obviously we got his tail, which is kind of a triangular form. I'm going to go in here and round it out. This would be the most, basic and generic level of your pre-drawing. What you want to do after that is go in and start to refine. His face kind of comes down here a little bit. I drew his oval a little bit too high. I might need to go in and refine his arms a little bit, and so on. And this is how you study your subject. Except you wouldn't want to trace over the top of the image like I'm doing. You want to recreate that down on a separate sheet of paper. Now, as you're doing that, your mind will constantly be working. His placement of his eyes to his nose, one thing that you could do there is triangular placement on that. And then for the bottom parts of his mouth, another triangle right there. This one was pretty flat. Let's go for one that's a little more 3D, where you've got more things that overlap each other. If you want your work to look dynamic and cool and interesting, have them at a three-dimensional angle like this. All right, so look at the most obvious shape. I see kind of an egg shape, so I'm going to practice and drop it. All right, we'll go back and we'll refine it a little bit later. All right, so his ears, I see a majorly obvious triangle right here. Okay, this is more of an oval with kind of triangular edges to it. All right, let's do his head. That's an egg shape. All right, you can always go in there with your eraser and clean up any lines that you don't want. All right, next, check this out. This is why I picked a three-dimensional form. For one, he's got his chubby arms over here, and he's got some little fat rolls. I'm actually going to treat these as separate forms. Okay, so let's start with his arm and his hand and that chubby piece. And then here is his other roll, and that connects back to his back and under. Eyes, nose, and if you need help, try to connect a triangular type form, and that'll help you think in 3D as you draw. And so on. I'm going to go in here and refine a little bit. What the hey, what do you say we pre-draw the hand just to get a little more crazy? Okay, let's see what this pre-drawing looks like. Remember what I said about the ugly duckling stage? That would be what a pre-drawn image like this would look like before you start. And now everything is planned. Everything is plotted out. Your mind does not have to think about the proportions of all of these things in relationship to each other because it's already been done. Now it's just detailing after that. Obviously, what you did not get out of this demonstration is how to measure your form against itself, because I was simply tracing over the top of an image. That doesn't do anything. The purpose of this was just to show you how to extract the shapes from what you see. So, hope this was helpful. I'll see you guys in class. Bye.